Caroline Buchanan. Where did it all start?
I never felt like a true mountain biker.
BMX is gnarly.
It was so hard to get sponsorship.
What's been the most challenging thing that you've attempted so far?
Just proved myself you don't need sleep. You can be in the worst headspace possible and you can win.
Caroline Buchanan is a professional BMX and mountain bike athlete. She is a 2-time Olympian, 8-time world champion, has 32 World Cup wins, and landed world's first tricks in slopestyle.
She has also launched her own mentorship program, has been a presenter, and even wrote a children's book. She really has done it all.
As it rolled over me, fortunately it went back onto 4 wheels. But if it had stayed on its roof, it would have pinched me and I'd be dead. Third and final surgery, it all healed and recovered. And then from there, it was a solid, I would say, 9 months recovery from that surgery.
Was there a time where it was really, or a moment where you thought like, I don't know, like a really tough time where you thought maybe you don't want to do it as a career? Guys, this is a brand new podcast, and the goal is to interview the most iconic figures in sport and health from around the world. But I need to ask you guys a big favor to please like and subscribe, because it would make a huge difference to the size of this podcast, and ultimately, the bigger the podcast gets, the bigger the guests. Enjoy this episode. All right, Caroline Buchanan, thanks so much for joining me. It's really cool to have you on.
It's good to be a part of it. Congratulations on dropping your first episode. Was it just this week?
Thank you. No, I'm stoked. I wanted to start with what's your mission in life, and particularly with Ignite and women in sport. What's your main focus?
Oh, wow. Well, I think the bio, as you could call it, for my Ignite scholarship program, I had a quote on there that said, I want to be that rebel role model that continues to do things a little bit differently and changes the mold and creates a new trajectory and pathway. And instead of, I guess, leaving that ladder up, leading that ladder down for the future, especially girls. So I think that's what the bio would say. But probably for me personally, especially going through I guess a lot of health challenges and highs and lows of being a professional athlete, and diversifying my career from BMX to mountain biking, I would say it's much more I feel like I'm this generational talent and I've been given these gifts. And I think if we come to, the purpose of why I'm here on earth and why I've got this amazing opportunity to inspire and be inspired. And I think I just want to uphold this stoke and show people that you can chase a dream, because I was that little girl that wanted to be a BMX bandit, but there was no future and no career. And at the moment, there was no girl that was really, there wasn't slopestyle, there wasn't crankworks, there weren't all these career opportunities in mountain biking. So I had to really forge that path and forge that way. So I really feel like I'm inspired now, just to give back. And that's been a huge part of that legacy piece with Ignite. And then with all of my partners that I work with and sponsors, they're be you, do you, continue inspiring. It's a pretty cool position to be in.
Yeah, it's really cool to see. And I mean, there's been definitely a big push in the last few years, I guess, with particularly the women's side, certainly in mountain biking. And it's been really cool to see.
Yeah, it's been a massive wave. And that was actually, I almost wanted to just wind back the needle for, how hard I was pushing in mountain biking and that level of risk. And it was as soon as I missed out on my third qualifying for the Tokyo Olympic Games BMX racing, I closed that chapter and I thought, you know what, I've spent the last 10 years of my career doing BMX and mountain bike and jumping between Olympic cycles. I said, what could I actually achieve if I dedicated everything to mountain biking? Let's close that chapter. Let's commit fully all in. And when I did that and made that choice, that next week, the Audi 9s called me and said, this door's opened for, now women's free ride and women's slopestyle. And they basically just said, we know that you've predominantly been this racer your entire career and you've dabbled in a few little tricks here and there. And at the time I'd gone and done freestyle BMX and attended a FEES event and gone to like the world champs and got a top 10, but I wasn't fully passionate about FEES and freestyle BMX. So they're like, hey, we know that you've got the sponsorship support. We know that you've got the base of like skill set to come over and, lead this charge. It was COVID at the time. Like I knew that I'd have to fly over and quarantine on the way home. And I'm like, oh my gosh, just like don't get injured. But it was really that like legacy piece. And it was this, I guess it was this like magnetic pull that I'm like, I really don't want to wind back up the risk again, but how can I not lean into this opportunity and say, you know, you're a part of that first wave of free ride mountain biking and slopestyle women. And as soon as Crankworks and FMB were like, hey, it's now in Crankworks, I'm like, damn it. All right, we're doing it. And I was like, had that little taste and was like, okay, I'm in. All right, I'm in again. Twist my arm.
Spoken like any true action sports athlete.
Yeah, and that little bit of like
Opportunities there.
dangle the carrot and the adrenaline's like, all right, we're doing it.
YOLO.
We're in.
Maybe, so you mentioned that you're obviously transitioning to mountain biking, but you had a huge background in BMX. And so where did it all start, first of all? Because I mean, I think becoming a professional mountain biker or BMX racer, or never mind slopestyle athlete, is not your normal day job, and especially for women, which is changing. And yeah, how did that all? Where did that come from?
Well, I was 5 years old, like drove past the local BMX track with my brother, and in Canberra, Australia, where I grew up, there was 2 different tracks. So yeah, I literally just started BMX racing, and I was a little tomboy, so anything my brother wanted to do, I'm like, "Oh, you're climbing a tree. I want to climb a tree." And yeah, he got into racing, and I think at the time, like I wasn't necessarily like a team sport athlete, and I loved BMX, and I'm like, "This is scary. It's adrenaline. Success is on you, failure's on you." I learned to crash. Like it was just really such a great family sport for all of us. And we started at national, like, so we basically went state, national, world. And I went to the first world championships when I was 9 in Paris.
Wow.
So I guess the trajectory was like really fast from 5 starting to 9 at world championships to 15 is when I started mountain biking. And I guess I was very experienced. Like I had all these events around the world, but I never actually won that first world title until Four Cross, which was in Australia in 2013. So yeah, like the trajectory was quick, but it took me a long time to really learn how to win. And then once I discovered that recipe within myself, I've been able to navigate and sort of stay in that upper bracket in sport. But BMX was, yeah, like I'm so glad people say BMX mountain bike, like that's the hardest decision to make. They both have such different stories in my life. BMX getting to an Olympic level and racing like high performance sport and being part of like a greater team, like Team Australia, going to the Olympics, such a surreal experience. Mountain biking was always like that reset for me. It was like, okay, I'll do an Olympic cycle and then it was like refresh. Mountain biking, it was that fun. It was that like a little bit of an escape for me. It was yeah, that balance that really kept me performing in BMX. And when I like decided to fully give that up and not do both and taking on all these crazy challenges, then I just found like so much more of an edge in mountain biking. But it was that base. Like, I think if I'd never done BMX, I would have never had those base skills that have now translated into winning Queen of Crankworks titles and being that all round kind of athlete. You're able just to pull from like a greater, yeah, you're able to pull from this greater bag of tools.
hmm It's I mean, BMX is gnarly. I think it on TV it looks relatively chilled, because it's all smooth, and obviously mountain biking is rough and you got trees and rocks and stuff. But I mean, I did a bit of BMX before I started downhill, and I remember
See.
actually I went to the world champs in the age categories in Pietermaritzburg in
Yeah.
2010, and I remember standing at the top of they were there's always two start ramps, and then you've got the pro start ramp and the other one. And I remember standing at the top there, and I was just like, holy, like this is so hectic.
Yes.
Like with 8 guys on 20-inch wheels with bikes that weigh nothing, and you all sending it down there to the first double is, yeah, I'm much happier doing my own thing on a mountain bike.
Yeah. Oh, it definitely teaches you to commit. It's like you're either out in front and out of trouble or you're in the pack, probably getting caught up. So, yeah, it definitely, I think that was one of the biggest things that BMX taught me was like to back yourself and process. And like, I wanted to train so hard so that I wasn't in the pack. I'm like,
Mhm.
train hard, race easy, just get out in front, get out of trouble. And that really inspired me to like, yeah, end up having one of the best gate starts in the world and sort of change those weaknesses into strengths. So I'd go into an event and I would just like channel my nerves, and all of my tools were not around like revving up and performance. It was around, okay, like I know how to win. I've got the formula. I just need to actually control this like inner sort of mongrel and breathe and have more like chi energy. And yeah, once I just learned to like tame that back and control it, then I just started executing like 32 World Cup wins, went into 5 world championships, like, yeah, all these, like, boxes just started ticking, but it was like I had to go the extreme of, like, training at this level and then winding it back, like, train on your A game, race on your C game.
I feel like definitely the BMX would have helped massively going into mountain biking, because pretty much I mean, if you look at like Aaron Gwynn and all these top racers, most of them have a background in some form of BMX, or at least riding a lot of pump track and stuff like that. Because not having suspension, I felt that like moving over to mountain bikes from a BMX it felt like, oh, now this is easier, because you've got help. And just like the flow, pumping, and obviously the training aspect, having that explosive power, um, which I feel like a lot of kids maybe miss, if they haven't had that BMX background.
Yeah, it definitely teaches, like, pedaling technique and the whole pumping side, so translating over to, like, building speed, and I think definitely when you talk about, like, slalom and pump track and these
Hmm.
disciplines, it was a huge benefit. But it's actually been like a blessing and a curse. I still to this day, like I was at Threadbowl on the weekend, I'm still picking apart my cornering because I am that typical BMXer. Like I come into turns and I'm like, bam, drop my outside foot down whether I need to or not. So I've always been great at like putting pressure through my feet at, manually and jumping and like momentum, but never been good at putting pressure through my feet and learning how to like
Hmm.
keep my pedals level and like press through turns because I'm a BMXer. Come in, drop the outside foot, pedal out. So there's still just like little ingrained patterns that, and I never actually learnt even like braking properly because I was on
Uh-huh.
BMX. I was, you know, one back brake. I
Yeah,
never learnt the basis of like
let's do some skids.
what is braking, like how do you set up a turn? So I'm now only just really picking apart like so much of the fundamental skills of mountain biking and tapping into this next level of like, all right, like I can actually find time on the trail and I can so yeah, it's cool to be like my age now in the career and just going, oh, I'm still challenged by the sport. I can still pick apart technique and find more sort of time.
That's the one unique thing about mountain biking. It's no matter how long you do it, you always have new experiences, because
Yes.
you can always ride a new trail, always different weather, different conditions, different bikes, which I think is pretty unique. Because a lot of sports, when you stop competing, if you're a football player or something, I think it can be quite hard when people stop, because I mean, you're not going to go and play a casual game of footy with your friends on the weekend, after you've been a pro player. But as a mountain biker, you can still ride for your whole life and always have new challenges and new experiences, which I think is pretty amazing.
Yeah, I'm glad I've found it. I'm probably exactly like you, like, you're never gonna lose that love for it. Like, you can always ride casually if you wanted to dive back into competition tomorrow, you still could. It's like, yeah, you're always gonna be enticed.
I mean, and so obviously you've had this journey now into BMX and moving into mountain biking, and I think people see you on the podium, they see you winning, they see the sort of the perfect world, as people do on social media. But I'm sure that, I know myself that there's a lot of challenges that come along the way. And in that process, was there a time where it was really, or a moment where you thought like, I don't know, like a really tough time where you thought maybe you don't want to do it as a career?
Um, yeah, definitely. I think mountain biking in particular has like come a long way. I was only talking about this with like Shana Hearn and different mountain
Mm-hmm.
bikers the other day. Mountain biking's funny, and like I've come from the other side of this trajectory with BMX and then into four cross, and I never felt like a true mountain biker. So it was like, despite like one world title, the next world title, um, whether I'd like win sea otter slaloms or go to Crankworks and win slalom and win pump track, like I never felt like I was truly respected as this like mountain
Mm-hmm.
biker. And it wasn't until I think the Queen of Crankworks and diving into a little bit more of like downhill and being diverse and speed and style and like learning freestyle element that I truly within myself was like, okay, now I'm a mountain biker. So I think looking back to those struggles when I was like 14, yeah, I definitely almost quit the sport like in BMX. It was so hard to get sponsorship. Like my
Mm-hmm.
biggest sponsor at the time going to the first Olympic Games, I was a world champion and my bike sponsor was $7,000. Like mum and dad were still helping me out with money. Um, I remember just being like, what's happening? Like
Mm-hmm.
I know Jared Graves won the worlds. He won four cross and I won four cross, and like the paychecks were different. And I
Mm-hmm.
knew his Yeti salary at the time. And, mum and dad are still chipping in to help me out. And I just was like, at what point is this going to like
Mm-hmm.
actually feel like a legitimate career? And yeah, so I think on the identity side, sure, definitely, I was like, what is my place in the industry? How am I going to make a career out of it? And I think it's just so fortunate now that all the platforms have opened, and that's why I love that now, like especially the women, they can come up in the sport, and if they want to do slope style, there's a
Mm-hmm.
trajectory all the way to Crankworks. If they want to do free ride, there's that trajectory all the way now to Rampage. Um, there's all these like options. So I never wanted to be like just was always this like saying to me, and I'm like pretty ADHD. So I was like, I don't want to just be downhill. I don't want to just be BMX or like I loved being this all-round athlete, but there wasn't a
Mm-hmm.
career path for that. And like, how did I go and tell Trek, hey, like you need to sponsor this all-round athlete, but you know, the real pinnacle of the sport was always downhill. And I think for me personally, like I feel like the industry has really shifted that to make it in mountain biking, you used to have to be a downhiller. Whereas now to make it in mountain biking, you can be a top freeride athlete, you can be a top slopestyle
Mm-hmm.
athlete, you can be a king or queen of Crankworks. Like there's those options and it's really like respected. And um, I think there's definitely like a bit of a stigma around that. And I was only sort of talking to Shanahan the other day, and she's like, she's just taken a step back from downhill racing, and she's like at like that elite, you know, World Cup level. And she's like, it's really hard to step away from to even, go into the US, the big money series in downhill or to go into Crankworks. She's like, yeah, there's definitely been this like, I don't know if it's Australia, but there's definitely been this undercurrent of like, if you want to make it in your career, like you've got to get to downhill World Cup level.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think now it's like you don't have to, and the industry is actually looking for other athletes, and there's opportunities, and there's space for everyone to make money and to call yourself a professional mountain biker. So yeah, I think going back to those struggles, I'm now so proud just to go, oh wow, like you now have options, girls. Like you don't have to be like, oh, should I quit? Like what is who am I? And like how do I navigate this world of biking?
And I mean, what drove you through that time? Because I mean, I can imagine, you're 15 and you kind of weighing up the pros and cons and whether you want to dedicate your life to this, and what was your main motivation to push through that and ultimately make it to the top?
Ooh, main motivation, I think I just love the sport. So I've
Hmm.
always loved competing. I'm naturally like a competitor at heart. So put me on a gate, put me between white lines, like I'm going to race. And I think that's always been, yeah, ingrained in my nature. And I think what also drove me too, and it's become now like a bit of a blessing and a curse, is because it was such a struggle and I had some really great mentors. I think early I had to see it as this like hustle and I had to see it as such a business growth opportunity that I had this mentor and he'd be like, add 500 people on LinkedIn this afternoon. This is how you're going to write an email.
Hmm.
When the bike industry wasn't sponsoring me and I was winning world titles in four cross, he's like, put your own website on your bike. Like, you know, I guess it was just driven by this constant hustle of like self promotion and trying to level up the sport and trying to focus on mainstream opportunities and, be on the face of cereal companies, be on the face of major telco companies. I think it was just this like unrelenting thing that was then ingrained from such a young level to be like hustle, grind, like everything you're doing is going to pay off. You don't know the ceiling, you don't really know the direction because no one's done it. So I
Hmm.
think that's where I say like it's a blessing and a curse that was a blessing to get me to where I'm at now and to have so much support and longevity and everything and have some like incredible sponsors. But it's also a curse now because yeah, that unrelenting just doesn't turn off. Now I'm like, okay, what's next? And broadcast and media and yeah, Crankworks, I can compete and then I can do media at the same time. And yep, Red Bull Hardline, I'll be down there. I'll be at Crankworks next week. Natural selection the weekend after. Got it. 17 days straight working. All right. Let's throw in a brand campaign in there as well. And what else are we doing, manager? Like, so that unrelenting side is now like, yeah, it gets a bit wound on.
I think it's I mean, typical trait of good athletes, just that you kind of that always wanting more and feeling like you can do more, and which is a good thing, I guess. I mean, that's why you've gotten to where you have. But at the same time, yeah, it's tough to have that off switch. I mean, I found that myself, just like, and just being able to stop thinking about what's the next goal, and saying no is quite tough sometimes.
Yeah. Saying no and then just like finding peace and like winding it back and resting and recovery. Like, with health things, sometimes they're the biggest forced injuries that you're like, all right, I've got to slow down. I've got to stop. And yeah, you tend to rewrite the script a little bit.
And you were mentioning that with the opportunities now for women and stuff, and in general athletes, one of the big things is obviously social media, and it's crazy how it's allowed so many people now to make a living from the sport, without necessarily having to be at the pinnacle of downhill racing or BMX racing, just being able to provide value to brands and obviously entertain people, and things like that. What's your feelings on social media, and is that something that obviously you've done quite a lot? Do you enjoy that side of it? Because I feel like for me, it's kind of like a blessing and a curse, because
Mhm.
it can be enjoyable, but it can also bring a lot of pressure that you need to deliver, and you need to get a certain amount of views and provide that value.
Yeah. I think on the pressure front, definitely like you feel it. I'm at a point in my career now that I've found balance and aligned with brands and partners and manage those performance deliverables on and off bike, work with a great manager and have like tools and systems to be like, all right, how am I going to deliver this over a space of a season? And you just, like anything, you look at the big picture and you're able to break it down, work backwards. But it is quite a big pressure. I think when I was growing up, like we didn't have social media.
Hmm.
There wasn't Facebook. There wasn't all these opportunities to promote and endorse yourself and call yourself an athlete and inspire and be inspired. I think that's like what this whole social media network is. It's we all love riding bikes and as professional athletes we get put in this amazing hot seat to go, "Hey, Oakley, like Caroline, we want to work with you for 16 years. We sell product and you promote, but ultimately like you have fun doing it. you inspire just through what you're doing and your
Mm-hmm.
actions. Here's the tools and here's, finance and here's the best eyewear in the world. Like, go and do what you do. I think it's just such like a unique thing that you
Mm-hmm.
can call yourself a job. And if you can manage to like get all of these contracts and all of these sponsors, you can make a career just through social media and telling your story. And I think I always say, like, now that I'm mentoring these girls through Ignite
Mm-hmm.
scholarships, I say if you can be like consistent, unique, and authentic, that's like the biggest 3 pillars that's going to shine through in all of your career. And I think with all the partners I've always worked with, it's been that authenticity. It's had that little unique angle, that little unique style, or doing things a bit different, and then just being consistent with it. And that's like growth. I think that's authenticity. Like, it's just everything.
I mean, you're building your own brand essentially. I mean, it's sort of like your own business. You are the business, and
Yeah.
especially as if you don't have, I mean, obviously in the racing side, there's the teams and that's a big part of it. And a lot of people on teams, but essentially that's like being employed. But if you don't go that route and you do what you've done, or like myself, having your own sponsors and doing your own thing, obviously it's a lot more work, but it's also pretty rewarding because you can do what you want. You don't have a boss, essentially. You can plan your own schedule. There's way less pressure, only the pressure you put on yourself. But at the same time, I feel like it's with the social media stuff and how many opportunities it provides. I mean, if you look at people like Fabio Wibmer, for example, being able to be absolutely massive and arguably the highest paid mountain biker in the world, with what he's doing and not racing, which is amazing. But now I feel like that now, if you're a racer, you don't really have a choice. You have to do the social media as well, because mostly that's in your contracts. And now, instead of having this split between like, okay, I'm going to be a racer or I'm going to be a social media focused rider, as a racer now, you kind of have to focus on that, which I think is really tough, because I think like before, I don't know when Instagram really became a thing, maybe 2012, 2013 started to come up. But before then, it was like if you were a racer, you had your race season and was focused on training and obviously you try to get in the magazines and stuff. But when it was off season, it was off, and now it doesn't really ever switch
Not
off.
off season. Off season is an admin season, to be honest. It's like, all right, I finished like being the professional athlete and on the Crankworks World Tour and competing, and then you dive into off season, and then it's the body, it's the mind, it's the planning. It is increasing and it is challenging. I think stepping into the beginning of this 2024 year, I had 14 contracts. By the end of 2024, I had 17 contracts. Going into 2025, I have 20 contracts. So I was like, just telling my manager the other day, and we're like, all right, we need to be so organized to go. All my flights for the next season are already booked in. All my race schedule, like content creators around the world are already lined up for social media posts. We've managed to like break down all those contracts into like a simple notes. Like, just, I guess now it's like with the stresses and like things of the world, it's like, how can you on your phone really dumb everything down so that that output is like achievable? And for me, I've just gone back to the basics of like notes. You can now collab notes. Every month I've got those like brand deliverables who I'm working with around the world for like
Yeah.
posts. You just like break it down and tick it off. And there's just like simple tools, which I'm finding like is a bit easier than having complicated systems. But I do enjoy it. And it's crazy that the industry now, you can have all these opportunities.
It's interesting when people ask you, what do you do when you're not racing? Like, what do you do at home? You guys just chill, ride your bike, go to the gym, like, and it's so hard to, I don't know, people just think that athletes just like, I don't know, they live this perfect life and they just chill and, I don't know, play video games and then do a race every now and again. And it's it's kind of like, okay, no, you're doing everything. You're like a jack of all trades, trying to
Mhm.
manage your business essentially, train, compete, be in the perfect shape.
There you
Like,
go. On this topic, I literally screenshotted my day yesterday. So if we
wow,
if
there
we
we
look
go.
at, like, the day in the life of an off-season athlete,
Yeah.
it was everything from, like, draining my ice bath and cleaning it, sorting out the prize money from the admin on the weekend that I raced, posting on auction because 'cause I'm auctioning off my Trek bike for my
Uh-huh.
scholarships,
Yeah.
put 5,000 into shares. Woo! I'm in my invest um Then, yeah, planning for Maydena. I obviously had training. Then I'm figuring out my next fist signature glove. So I was doing all of that for like next year's
Mhm.
fist handwear gloves, figuring out an airbag and different campaign shoots because Nobby, one of the underwear partners that
Mhm.
I sponsored by, we've got a brand campaign in March dropping, and then start gluing and prep for hardline study notes. So that was basically 32 athletes of like hardline
Yeah.
Maydena. Last night, I'm, like, finishing Christmas cards, prepping all of that, and, that's 2 months away. So, yeah, day in the life of an off-season athlete is very rogue and interesting and sporadic of, like,
Mhm.
brand, CEO, finance, things for next year, forward planning campaigns, but then still, like, sleeping, eating, work on your nutrition, like, yeah, everything.
Yeah, and I can imagine that every day, I mean, I know for me, it's like every day is packed like that, and then every day it's just as packed. There might be different tasks, but it's like, but what's cool is most days are not the same, which keeps it fresh.
Yes. I think as a mountain biker too, they've actually done more studies on like mountain biking and how many tabs you have to have open and how many
Uh-huh.
decision making and how many choices that you have to do. There's so much sensory input. So I think naturally as mountain bikers, you have the ability to keep all these tabs open
Mhm.
and make all these like risk analysis choices and speed and judgment and everything that, yeah, when you dive into a career or you dive into other options in life, it's like you have that skill set to go, all right, like I know how to do this from like mountain biking. And you just tap into it from a career perspective.
Is that like what I mean, obviously there's so many challenges that go into being an athlete, but what for you would you say is the most difficult thing about being a pro athlete? Because I think from the outside, as we said, it looks to everyone like it's this perfect life, but there's no such thing as a perfect job.
Ooh, I'm so interested to know your take on this as well. So maybe after I say, you'll have to tell me your story because they've all got a different story, right? Like,
Yeah, yeah.
I think initially it's like a pyramid. I think the initial challenge is like learning the base of like any skill. So it's just the fundamental grind of the
Mhm.
technique, the hours that go into, I guess for me, like it was BMX, then it was mountain biking. And, you've got to obviously be really good on a bike before you're ever going to win races, before you're ever
Mhm.
going to be in that opportunity to be sponsored, make a career out of it. So I think the base and foundation is like a huge task. And then it goes right up to, that pinnacle pointy end. So yeah, I'm cute. Let me know. Let me know what you're thinking.
I mean, I think for me, I mean, obviously you need to be good on a bike and you need to put in the work over the years and that I mean that takes a long time to get to that point. But I think from a life perspective, what I find challenging is obviously a lot of your contracts and stuff are based around they're a year or 2 years or if you're fortunate 3 years, but it's always contract based and it's very much revolving around you've got to be delivering, whether that's doing well at races or having things go well on social media, or no matter what it is, it's just I find like that is a lot of when it's just you, it's fine. But like now, next year, I'm getting married, and then like in the few years, like kids will come along, and so I feel like having that um, pressure on you where you don't have a guarantee, after a year or two, um, is quite hard. I find it quite difficult to deal with. And again, when it was just me, you kind of don't think about it. It's like, yeah, not a big deal, because it doesn't affect anyone else. But when it starts coming down to other people, and maybe that's kind of why I've wanted to do something different, and partly why I wanted to start the podcast and have a sort of something more stable that I can control.
Yeah.
So I'm not relying solely on, a contract base, to have an income, because I think, yeah, at least for me, that's been quite difficult.
Yeah. No, I hear you on that one. It's the constantly being able to pivot and shift and
Hmm.
like re-identify and recreate yourself, and the industry changes and sidestep, or opportunities change, or racing formats change, or teams
Hmm.
change. Like you've just constantly got to be able to adapt and evolve and pivot. And I think that's for me more of, I guess, the constant challenge. But it's such a good skill set, because I think what it's taught from like having a professional career in mountain biking and BMX, and so fortunate for me that I can say it's been my entire career. So since I started racing, luckily mum and dad helped chipped in those
Hmm.
early days of, you know, getting to my first Olympic games and still having that bit of financial support from them. So I'd say like, yeah, the first like 5 years of my professional career, it was like work experience. I was still
Hmm.
getting supported by them. Like I didn't even know how I could be like, oh yeah, I'm a professional athlete. Like mum and dad still have me out. I live around the world, but I come home and stay at theirs. Like, you know? So I think, yeah, maybe just that constantly hustling, constantly being on, constantly re-pivoting, re-changing. Yeah, that's probably the biggest thing that I find is like a challenge as an athlete. And you've just got to be open to it and be like, I don't know what the future brings.
Hmm.
You can get injured. There can be all these different things that happen. But if you're moldable and you're able to go, all right, like, cool, slope style's opened. All right,
Hmm.
BMX is closed. Now mountain biking, queen of crankworks. Like, you just take those opportunities as they come and say yes. And that's what I'm finding now with broadcasts. Like, it was absolutely terrifying and exciting.
Hmm.
That first call up for Nitro World
Imagine.
Games, and they're like, yeah, you'll be fine. And then I step on and they're like, cool. First interview, Travis Pastrana. And I'm like, never done this before.
No
And they're
pressure.
like, "You'll be fine." And you're like, "Pivot, adapt, you got this." It's like same like pep talk from like racing comes in.
But I feel like that's where racing kind of helps, because there's not many things in the world where you're in a start gate or a start hut, and at that moment when you're about to, whether it's in a BMX race, downhill, whatever, there's not much else that matters. It's like that is it, and even though you might be nervous about something or whatever, it's like you got to put that aside and just get the job done.
Yes, it is. I love it. I think we're also fortunate that we get to do mountain biking and we get to experience that feeling of, really backing yourself and really taking ownership of your life. And I think challenging yourself to like the nth degree and facing that fight flight, learning how to control
Hmm.
it, facing injuries and adversities, like riding on the edge and finding that like what is the capability that you've got within inside you. Like it's cool to be like, hey, that's my max.
Yeah.
Or you achieved that, or you were a racer for 15 years and then you decided to go and do a world first front flip mid COVID when you have to quarantine in another country. Like, oh yeah, did you achieve that?
It's pretty cool. I And you mentioned with the pivoting there, and I think sometimes have you need almost something big to happen to make you have this change. I feel like sometimes athletes can kind of get stuck in like one way of life, and it's hard to especially if an athlete's been racing for or competing, no matter what sport it is, for 10 years, 20 years, and then suddenly it's like they have to stop and they haven't made that adjustment before. I think it's really tough for people to you know to make that change, and I think a lot of athletes have issues then, mental issues afterwards, like who am I now without the sports? And I think, like for me, having the injuries that I did, as tough as it was at the time, I'm actually looking back now really grateful that it happened, because it taught me so much about myself and what really matters in life, and that racing, as fun as it is, racing is just racing. And there's way more things in life that are much more important: family, friends, your health. Suddenly when it's funny when people ask, the first thing they ask you is like, oh, when are you going to get back on the bike? And you're like, okay, well, my first step is I just want to have a shower unassisted. That would be nice.
Yeah.
Like, and I know, on that side, I know, was it 2017 that you had like a really bad accident? You had,
Yes, New Year's Eve 2017, and then pretty much 18, 19 was 2 years of uh, multiple surgeries and coming back. And then it was basically, 2020, missed Olympic selection, dove straight into full-time mountain biking. And it's only really been from sort of 2021 now to 2024 that I've just invested that time to mountain biking. And that's equated to world first front flips, to 2 Queen of Crankworx titles. Um, and then now with like slopestyle and be a part of SMB, and landing all these now superwoman seat grab Indian airs and claiming some new tricks, renaming them.
um, I mean, so that was like 3 years of pretty much being sidelined, or
Yeah. Yeah, because there was so many complications with it. So I had an off-road vehicle accident,
Mhm.
New Year's Eve. A friend was driving and rolled it down a fire road. I ended up going under it, caught the roll cage, and as the vehicle flipped over me, so it was like a Can-Am. As it rolled over me, fortunately, it went back onto 4 wheels. But if it had stayed on its roof, like it would have pinched me and I'd be dead. So there's a lot of factors that I'm super grateful that I'm still here and alive.
Mhm.
Fact that I grabbed the roll cage, everything went slow-mo. Like, I've had so many crashes in my career that I pulled my head back and the lights broke my nose on the way through, and I, like, grabbed the roll cage and I benched it as hard as it could. And I remember that feeling of, like, heard my sternum crack, felt the pressure, like, I was winded, never regained, like, a breath, so I was like,
Mhm.
"Okay, that's probably lungs." I kinda knew, instantly, I was like, "Oh, this is not good." Like,
Mhm.
um, so it was, like, 45 minutes away from a rural hospital, which couldn't do lung drains and things like that, so it was 45 minutes to a rural hospital, which my friend did, like, a guided meditation the entire way and, like, focused on my breathing. Luckily,
Wow.
that kept me from going into cardiac arrest. It kept me alive. So as my double pneumothorax, so punctured and collapsed lungs were bleeding out, my heart wall was also punctured and that was bleeding out in my lungs. My sternum was broken, my nose was broken. I was in this really, like, hectic state of control your breathing, control everything. Otherwise, like, you're gonna go into cardiac arrest and probably not be here today. So, focus on my breathing, got to that hospital, then I had to
So
wait
gnarly.
until the ambulance came to get me to the City Hospital of Canberra. Finally went into all those surgeries, and then, I remember, like, not really being very conscious for, like, 4 or 5 days in ICU, and then that 2-year block of recovery consisted in, like, having a sternum surgery that was like, at first they were like, "Oh, maybe it'll heal." It was like this. They're like, "Maybe it'll heal." And then 4 months later, they're like, "Oh, there's still like a centimeter gap. Maybe it's not gonna heal." So, a Australia's a little bit more of a conservative country, and I've kind of
Mhm.
learnt, like, you have to be your own doctor,
Yeah.
and you really have to manage, like, if you've got an injury, get second, third opinions, ask questions, and really be on top of, like, it all and do your research. That was one thing I didn't do. I was like, just listen to the first surgeon, and when they're like, "Oh, don't get surgery," I was like, "Okay." And then, like, you're a pawn,
Mhm.
like, in a game of chess waiting, and then you lose time and you lose recovery. So I always tell everyone now, like, when they go through injuries, get every scan possible, get
Mhm.
second, third opinions, do your research, look into all the areas and, like, understand. Don't just, like, listen to that first little bit of information, because that definitely set me back a lot. And then, um, it's a unique injury 'cause, it's mainly only, like, open heart surgeries that they would cut your sternum this way, and then they'd wire it closed.
Mhm.
So
That's so wild.
when you break your chest this way. There's no real system to like fix it.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a bit of a trial. Like Australia wouldn't do it. When I had to fly to California and I got surgeons over there to
No
fix this
way.
surgery, it was like 50% chance of mortality rate if, your sternum bone gets infected during this surgery because your lungs and your heart and all your organs, they lay on your sternum. So, um, yeah,
Whew.
that's risk. And I think I remember going back to that time, I'm like, I want to be back on the bike again. I want to be alive. Like, there's so much more I want to live and achieve and like
Mm-hmm.
that legacy and give back and inspire. And I think it just takes you to this like bigger part of what is life and what is like purpose. And um, yeah, so managed to survive 3 sternum surgeries, and the first plate broke, the second one, the bolts backed out, and the third time,
Oh my
um,
gosh.
2 cardiothoracic surgeons were like, "All right, we're gonna plate it, we're gonna cable it, and we're gonna like bolt it. So we're gonna like 3-way brace it." And they're like third and final time. And yeah, luckily, like it was that third and final surgery. It all healed and recovered. And then from there, it was a solid, I would say, 9 months recovery from that surgery. So yeah, it was virtually 2 years of my life just like questioning identity and like struggling with yeah, all of the waves of depression and anxiety and like, surviving. And you're like, how do you even get through this? But it taught me some of my greatest life lessons, and it acted as that platform to when I did come back to the sport and started Muay Thai fighting, really like
Mm-hmm.
working on not feeling like vulnerable. And you had to work through all these layers of like fear and trauma to
Mm-hmm.
get back onto the bike, to get back onto that start line. And yeah, like I think it was one of my greatest journeys. And also, I think if anyone said, "What's your biggest career highlight?" I would say working back from that and getting back on the bike and putting myself back on that start line and just having like no excuses to what should have been a career ending injury became one of the biggest platform and launching pads into such a diverse career now that if I didn't go through that, I don't think I wouldn't have the success or the mindset that I have now.
I think, yeah, it's an incredible journey, and as different as your injuries were to mine, it was a similar time frame, like a couple of years. And I don't know how you feel about the sport now, but um, you, as you said, you learned so much about yourself, and as you do in that time, and questioning everything. And I also struggled a lot with anxiety. I had panic attacks, like, and, kind of questioning who are you, like without the sport. Um, but I feel like for me at least, I actually enjoy the sport way more now than I did before. Um, which is, yeah, it's weird looking back. Like as hard as it was, I don't know if I would change it because I would be worried that I wouldn't be who I am. I don't know how it has been for you, but it sounds like that you're in a good place now.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think success is funny. You're trying to find that recipe that works for you and
Hmm.
how you operate to win. And I think going through like a big injury like that, growing up, you're more, the blinkers are on. And I would say you're so hard on yourself and you're your
Hmm.
biggest own critic. And you're much more in that like mindset of like or like win at all costs. And
Yeah,
I wouldn't sometimes it's not healthy. Like I think a lot of athletes
definitely.
growing up, you're actually not in a really healthy mindset. You are your biggest worst critic. You are mentally bashing yourself after events. You're like, you go into the debrief and you're not actually like super stable and super
Hmm.
happy. And like, I don't know, like it's a pretty common trend with a lot of athletes. And then finally, when you learn that you can have such mental stability and such great health and be so happy and all rounded,
Hmm.
um, and that you can win from that mindset, you can like have that switch. Yeah, I think it takes many years as a professional athlete to be able to learn that. Like, what is that switch and how do you turn it on and how do you have that balance and not just be this like hectic, driven robot? Like, yeah.
I feel like it takes a lot of the pressure off. At least for me, it did as well, because before that, it was, as you said, win at all costs, and that's your whole life is just surrounded by the sport, and that's all that mattered, at least for me, and which was definitely not healthy. And I think a lot of athletes are in that position, and it takes something big to happen sometimes, and unfortunately, it can be a painful process. But yeah, it sometimes takes something massive to happen to really shift your perception. And yeah, I don't know. I just feel it's funny now because I see even at the races when this year being at the races and seeing some guys before the start and stuff, and everyone is so serious and so focused, which they need to be. But you see them at the bottom, and if things don't go their way, they look like someone's died. They're so, it's like the whole world has ended. And yeah, I don't know. I think for me, it just gave me that perspective when it's like, okay, well, obviously you're disappointed, you want to win, you want to do your best, but at the same time, it's like, look where you are, like look what you get to do, and look how amazing this is, amazing people, you're riding your bike, all over the world. And I think like having that perspective, yeah, makes it so much more fun when you do win, or when you don't. It sort of makes it easier either way.
Yeah, it takes a long time to be able to get to that place. I think what you're saying, like, yeah, it's like someone's died. That is a really easier place to perform from, I believe, is like being a professional athlete.
Hmm.
When you're obsessed, when nothing else
Hmm.
matters, when you eat, breathe, sleep, that
Hmm.
result, when all your self-worth is on that
Yeah.
result, that title, when nothing else matters, like no distractions, absolute like toxic mongrel. Like you'll self-critic, you'll bash yourself mentally, like,
Hmm.
but it's like, bam, you can go out and you can be unstoppable and you can win, 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 one world title, two world title, 8 world titles. When's it ever going to be enough? Like, I think I was definitely like, I lived and breathed that. And when the injury happened, like you said, I think what it did is it challenged identity as a whole, and it challenged like, how do you lead from the bench? And it challenged like, what is like that role of being an influencer? What is that role of the talents you've been given? What's your role on this planet? Like it just opened
Hmm.
up this whole thing to like being human. And then I think it became a little bit harder to then compete because you're in this place of going like, okay, like I want to have signature kids bikes. I want to start mentoring programs. I want to dive into broadcasts. Like, I want this, like, I want to be a better friend, a better daughter. I want to be more present to my niece that I missed 5 of her birthdays. And, you just want to be more present as a whole, and be a little bit like less selfish because athletes are definitely the selfish creatures. Um, it then becomes more challenging to be structured and to still win. Like
Hmm.
that was a real
Yeah.
shift to be like, how do you win from a kind mindset? How do you
Yeah.
how do you give yourself permission to
Yeah.
have rest days? How do you give yourself permission? Like it's this whole new way of thinking. So yeah, it's a challenge for most athletes, but it's such a rewarding one.
I think, the happiness factor is also a big question mark as well, because I think yeah, most athletes when they start, if you want to be like yourself, you multi-time world champion, and I'm sure when you were a little girl growing up, that was your dream to be world champion. Um, and I feel like you'll be able to speak to this, but you think that when you win that title, then I'm going to be happy.
Yeah.
And I don't, I mean, maybe it is the case. You are happy for sure that you've got there, but then it's like, okay, now I want to win another one, and
Mm,
where does that stop?
yep. I agree. It's like I'm happy, but did I feel that win
Yeah.
completely? Like absolutely not. Yeah, I think I look back and I'm like, did I actually feel any of those world titles? Or was I just like, yeah, back to the drawing board,
Yeah.
and celebrate, big World Cup after party, whatever it is, and then like you're back into training. It's just like, "Tut, tut." So yeah, definitely I feel a lot more now with, yeah, wins and losses and everything.
I definitely feel that that's a trend, like as athletes get a little bit later in their career and they have that maturity. Because yeah, it's in the beginning, it's like, even I think back, and I mean, I didn't win world champs, but my best season was 2017, and I finished at a top 20 or 21st at a World Cup. And for me, that was like a huge result for me, and something I've been working towards for so long. But I look back and I was like, I really didn't enjoy that year. Like, even though I had good results and I won events in Europe and stuff, and it, yeah, it was kind of like I was performing well, but I felt like a robot, and it
Yeah.
was just like, okay, next, okay, train, recover, move on to next event, and I think that's kind of sad, like that, yeah, you kind of missing the what it's all about, But as you said, it's really tough to actually find that place where you enjoying it and taking everything in, but then still being able to actually perform and win.
Yeah. And I think definitely it just requires doing the work. Like for anyone listening to the podcast, you don't need a career ending injury. You don't need this crazy health condition like you've gone through to be able to like stop, slow down, reassess, do that self help work, understand your body and mind and everything more. Like there's so many tools with podcasts and things that you can sign up to. I went to like a 7-day meditation retreat in
That's
America
cool.
after one of my injuries. And, I think just deep diving a little bit more of the spiritual world, deep diving like so many audiobooks, understanding like, I guess, why you are how you are
Mhm.
and how you think and your emotions and your upbringing and your family and like all of that work, it then becomes the biggest tools and the biggest assets to have a longevity in your career and to be able to continue to pivot and turn. Um, I really felt that at the Olympic Games this year in Paris was being just to be able to like stand there and like hold space for all of these
Mhm.
athletes and be able to resonate with them, whether they win, lose, draw, think of the greater picture, know the emotions they're going through, know how to talk about the story, the analytics. Like I was really proud to be able to stand there and hold that space for all these athletes from a broadcast perspective. Cause I was like, wow, like what a long way I've come from that, like just such self-critical robot, like driven,
Mhm.
selfish, like BMX racing athlete that like nothing else in the world mattered to all these years later being able to like send a broadcast and a message home from all these action sport athletes in Paris and tell their stories. That truly is like such a cool feeling. So finally, like I'd gone from never being proud of being an Olympian to like getting home from Paris and being like, being Olympian's the coolest thing ever. I'm getting a tattoo and like
That's cool.
and got my first little tattoo, and I'm like, "Why did it take me 12 years to get the rings?" But I'm glad I did.
Jeez, yeah, I mean, it's crazy that, I mean, when you hear that from someone like yourself, and it's like you weren't proud to be an Olympian, it's like, it's for an average person, it's like, what? Like,
Yeah.
how does that work?
Like, I guess we're just so the whole system is so set up for, like, success, and if you don't win a medal, like, you've failed, and that
Mhm.
was really what I felt from 2 Olympic cycles, like, yeah, I'd been the world champion every year coming in and had set fastest lap times and I'd won time trials and I'd won the semifinals and I just hadn't delivered in that final moment. And yeah, I stepped away like hating Olympics, hating the
Mhm.
experience, felt like the biggest failure. And I think I used so much of that energy to then fuel future goals and future events. Um, but yeah, I think there's so much to be proud of just to be able to call yourself an Olympian, to be able to represent your country, like win, lose, or draw. There's yeah, such an inspiration of it, but it's this line of
Mhm.
being in that mindset is very hard to then be like, "I'm dedicated." I'm like, it's you can see it's
Mhm.
like such a divide.
And, yeah, I mean, just going back to the physical side, obviously, after the injuries and stuff and bringing yourself out of that hole, I mean, obviously, big focus of the podcast is also the health side as well. Um, how's your training And how does that changed over the years, before and after the injuries? Has there been any changes there? And then also, what things did you do health-wise, also diet-wise, to kind of, was there anything that you did to help that process, to get back to where you are now?
Wow. Health, training, how's it changed to be here now?
Well, you
Uh,
can start with the training side. We
I
can
was like,
delve
that's a
into.
massive question. I think a lot of self-work and a lot of like all those podcasts and
Mhm,
all of them, like reading those books like The Power of Now and just
mhm,
everything, every little bit of becomes like a huge tool. And I think mentally and physically, that's a huge tool. My day to day now is obviously like I really focus on, I would say I'm majority like a plant based athlete. I do eat meat, limit a lot of like my dairy intake,
mhm,
a lot of, yeah, just fueled by the earth. Um, I found that really limited my inflammation because I've got a lot of past injuries and broken so
mhm.
many things in my body. I really feel a lot of inflammation. So
I feel you.
um, I definitely limit inflammation in my body. I bought my family as like a thank you, like an infrared sauna for like supporting my
Okay,
career early. So I use infrared saunas every week. I have my own ice bath in my garage. So
love it.
I use that from a physical and mental perspective, which I've found is a huge asset. Um, I have actually increased like my aerobic capacity because I've always been
Mhm,
a sprinter.
mhm,
And then even with slope style this year, like as a free ride slope athlete, like you're not training like an Olympian and you're not focusing on your endurance capacity at all. And that actually like is a bit of a detriment to like mental health and physical health and well-being.
mhm,
So yeah, I've increased more of like with running and with just diverse training.
mhm,
Um, I guess increasing that capacity to be able to do like big festival events, doing downhill, the all mountains, the pump tracks, the slaloms, the
mhm,
everything. Um, so that then when you actually go to a crank works and you've got to like wind it back down, you have that capacity to be able to think, do sponsor stuff, do all your filming, race, have time with fans, like you have that capacity to like wind it down and then deliver. So I think from the training and health side, training at this like higher capacity and having a big engine and more of a fuel tank is definitely helping me deliver on the bike and then recover and
mhm.
travel. And yeah, I think at 34 now, like I'm definitely one of the oldest girls in Crankworks and I'm getting on the start gate with 18-year-olds and like this body's been through a lot. So I got to definitely double down on the recovery side. Um, I think definitely like initially growing up, I didn't have as much of a recovery focus or a health
Mhm,
focus. It was 2012, I needed to drop 8 kilos before an Olympic Games, and I just went like gluten-free, dairy-free. I had to increase my power output. So, yeah, that change there and realizing like how much better my body felt not
mhm,
carrying as much weight and everything. I was like, all right, I'm just gonna like keep this a part of like my staple
mhm.
life from then on.
Yeah, I think it's hard to make those adjustments. You mentioned the infrared saunas, and things like that, and I feel like my when I mention to people, I also do cold showers and things, and infrared saunas and meditation, and people look at you like you're a weirdo, doing things. They're like, "What? Like, why would you have a cold shower?" Um,
Yes.
have you ever done anything like fasted training or intermittent fasting, anything like that, and sort of played around with diet and stuff, or not really?
I guess I've gone full extremes. And like I have been vegan for 2 years and
Oh
yeah, I
wow.
definitely played around with it and just figured out like what is the best for me and how do I obviously feel recovery and feel performance and feel good within
Hmm.
my body, like from a physical perspective and from a performance perspective. Um, yeah, it's all like such an individual approach.
Hmm.
But I think like health and I'd say like the whole wellness side, the more that I uncovered and unpacked like I think going, as I said, like going on Buddhist meditation
Mm-hmm.
retreats and learning, I guess, mind and seeing sports psychologists and going and getting finally after all these years of my career, like I always knew like I was a bit different and I always knew like it was a superpower and a curse.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm like, I think different and I'm wired different. And like finally I'm gonna go, you know, see a psychologist and actually, you know, get tested and get studied. And
Mm-hmm.
I wish that I did that earlier because I would have been able to work within my superpower skill set of like having ADHD.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's such a benefit as an athlete. Like, so I think when we strip it all back, like for anyone listening, health, mindness, like mindfulness, well-being, everything, it's all about you and it's about your journey and your approach and like what works best. But you've got to do the work. And like it's just
Mm-hmm.
this big onion that if the more you keep peeling back, and the more you know, really the healthier you are. And doing the work as well, like I had so many concussions as
Mm-hmm.
well, and like I almost quit 2 years ago. I like was driving down the road, I was getting vertigo, the lines were converging, I would have close conversations and like I would get dizzy if like people stood too close talking to me. And I'm like, this is not normal. Like, yeah, I've
Mm-hmm.
had 10 plus concussions in my career and I'd crashed a lot of backflips at that time. And I was like, I need to go do the work. So yeah, worked with an incredible guy that works with the surfers and car drivers, and he's down in Melbourne. And
Mm-hmm.
that was a pretty extensive, like 3-month full neuro, brain, eye, a lot of like what Tiny Seagrave and other
Yeah.
athletes that recently been doing. Yeah, I did a 3-month block of full concussion neuro rehab and it was intense. It was like 20 minutes in the morning, 20 at lunch, 20 at night, which doesn't sound
Mm-hmm.
like a lot. It's less than a gym session, but for your eyes and for your
Yeah.
mind and how, like, different it is. Yeah, I was gassed, I was ruined, I was sleeping, I was, like, mentally, like, yeah,
Wow.
really struggled to get through it, but it reset and I was able to, like, not have these post-concussion issues that I was dealing with for a while, and, yeah, I think that is all health too, like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. Highly
You meant
recommend doing concussion rehab for anyone out there.
Yeah, concussions are hectic. Touch wood, I've been fortunate not to have too many, but it's I mean, you can also get unlucky. I mean, if you some people only have one and they can already have, some severe symptoms, so it is just unfortunate. It's part of it, I guess. And I think like with the health side, I think it's largely underrated, especially by younger athletes. And I mean, look how things potentially are changing, when you do take your health, seriously and the training and all of that. I mean, look at like yourself, you mentioned you're 34 now and still going strong. And, after all that you've been through and athletes like Minar that have, he's just retired now at 42. I mean, or 43 now. It's just like mind boggling. And this kind of,
Mhm.
so things are definitely shifting and it's showing that, in the old days, you kind of thought, well, early 30s, you were done if you were
Mm,
an action sports athlete, but definitely seems to be changing.
yeah. Yeah, it's definitely an active, like, choice of going, "There's an issue, I need to dive into it, I need to, like, do the work and fix it." And then, yeah, the body's incredible, the body wants to heal, it doesn't wanna
Hmm.
be in that disease state, it wants to be at ease, and, yeah, there's been definitely moments where my body's like and my mind, like, not at ease. I'm like, "Okay, I need to address this, I need to
Hmm.
do that concussion work, or I need to increase, my recovery side," and yeah, that's one of the reasons I got an ice bath because after all my chest surgeries and all that
Hmm.
trauma and punching and collapsing my lungs, like I actually couldn't have really cold stimulus. Like I've got metal in my chest, so that would get
Hmm.
cold and it would just like set off a full flight or fight reaction with me.
Hmm.
And I got an ice bath because I was like, I want to unpack controlling my mind and I want to not react to this
Hmm.
feeling. So I worked with it and slowly and every day I got like better and I was able to get deeper and I was able to control my mind and control that
Hmm.
reaction that my body was having. And I guess the body keeps score, like as much as we want to be the drivers of the ship. If you've had trauma or you've had injuries, you've gone through something, your body's the one that goes and pulls the handbrake really hard, or
Yeah.
shows through inflammation or physical weight or whatever it is in your body. It'll show the signs. So yeah, the ice bath thing, it took me a while, and then now like I can get in and not have any of those past symptoms, or go back to that time in my life. Like, oh, 4 minutes, I got this. Got the hype song playing. Let's go.
I've got so obviously in Germany, I don't need an ice bath because the water is so cold out the tap. But when I always spend a couple of months in South Africa every year, and I've got a freezer there, a top loading freezer, which I fill up with water, and that's
So
my
good.
makeshift ice bath. But again, people think I'm a bit of a nutter getting in there, but it's amazing. Like the feeling you get, just the first of all the mental control to do that, but then you feel. I tell people it feels like a drug when you get out. You feel like high, you know.
Yeah.
And I don't know, maybe it's your body just thankful that you've gotten out of the cold and that you're not going to die of hypothermia. I don't know.
It's kind of like that runner's high. Same thing. Good thing.
It's quite an amazing feeling for sure. I keep because like as you're talking, I have like questions that I want to ask you, but then you keep mentioning things that I'm like, oh, I need to ask her that. Um, I'll come back to it. Any regrets from your career?
Ooh. I mean, there's a lot of things like, I regret missing those start gates at Olympics and not delivering gold. And, I regret not having those greater tools sets at the time to be able to control my mind and emotions. Um, but then at the time, I think regret's a terrible word, because maybe at the time I regretted it, but because it acted as a tool and
Mm-hmm.
a lesson, and then I doubled down on, as I said, my mindset, and I doubled down on my gate starts. I doubled down on all these things that were holding me back. And then I learned, I was like, all right, like, get a really good gym trainer, become one of the strongest in the world, work with a biomechanic and person and figure out, like, how can you be a better gate starter?
Mm-hmm.
Just ask for help and get the right people and tool set around you. And I think if I hadn't have done that, like, I wouldn't have had the success. So not really a regret, because there's been a lot of life lessons. I think probably regret or life lessons, maybe just being like super harsh on myself,
Mm-hmm.
like growing up. Um, yeah, I'd say it definitely made success easier, but yeah, I think it's not healthy long term as an athlete to be such a hard critic on your performance. Just being a little bit more kinder to yourself in the process, because it's a long career, starting at 5,
Mm-hmm.
racing world championships at 9, um, being a world champion at 18 years old, and then a queen of crankworks at 33. Like, that's a massive, massive career span, and
Wild.
still
Yeah.
doing it and looking down the pipeline of still 3 to 5 year contracts with brands and sponsors in the industry. It's, you know, there's still so much to learn and so many opportunities with e-bike races and industry. So yeah, be kind to yourself. Yeah, it's a long road.
And one of the things I was going to ask you earlier was your proudest moment, but you kind of alluded to that, coming back from the injury and all that, and now with you've done BMX, done four cross, downhill. I know you wrote a book as well, as far as I know.
Oh
You've
yeah,
done
big
the
kids
you've done the
books.
commentary stuff. Slope style. I mean, what's been the most challenging thing that you've attempted so far?
Oh, I think deprogramming the racer in me to learn freestyle,
Mhm.
like not taking my hands off the handlebars for like 15 years of my career. I never used one hander. And then all of a sudden I'm like, how do you do a one hander? How do you do a tuck no hander? How do you do a bar spin? How do you flip? How do you 360? How do you flare? Like, so I think definitely learning how to deprogram that racer and that perfectionist and that like being 100% like in control, and learning how to like turn that off and look at look at something which you know, I'm probably going to crash learning this a few times, and I'm okay with
Yeah.
crash. I've actually got to roll into this attempt and go, it will take me maybe 10 to 15 crashes to learn this flare today. And in
Mm-hmm.
my backyard in America, like I had a resi landing, and like when I was learning to flare, I was like, I'm gonna crash 10 to 15 times today, and I'm okay with that. And like I didn't see it as a failure. I was like, it's a learning lesson. Like, so I think the hardest time period was probably deprogramming that racer and
Mm-hmm.
learning how to be more of a freestyle athlete.
It's funny because how old were you when you first started slopestyle or trying to learn tricks?
Oh. Well, the slope opportunity only came up in the last 2 years, and actually
Mm-hmm.
we only had 6 months from when we physically got told about slopestyle being Crankworks to that very first Rotorua
Wow.
drop-in
No pressure.
where I got a bronze medal, and that was like
Wild.
my goal of slopestyle was like, I wanna be in that first iconic year with the girls. I would love to like icing on the cake was like get a podium. And then I was so content and happy of like taking a step back and letting, the future of the sport. Like
Mm-hmm.
I knew my ceiling and I knew that I didn't want to have that level of risk forever. But I knew like this was a time period and like be all in and be
Mm-hmm.
safe and um just diversify, which is why like I learnt the superwoman seat grabs and the super seat indies and bar spins and tried to like diversify my skill set from like just doing flips or
Mm-hmm.
tucks or whatever it was that I was doing for speed and style. I had to diversify for slope. So um I can't remember what your question was, but here we are.
Yeah, I just thinking it's because, you said it's a couple of years ago now, but that would have
Yeah.
mean you're in your 30s already. And I think it's kind of counterintuitive to what people would have thought. You'd think like the younger rider would be willing to, do something like slopestyle and learn tricks and be willing to crash over and over again. But yeah, it sort of worked the other way around for you. And actually, interesting enough for myself, I mean, not that I did slopestyle, but I also did no tricks for my whole life and then had my injuries and came back during COVID. And I was like, you know what? I want to learn to backflip. Just like, and
So good.
then I did my first flip to do it like in during COVID. And it was weird because I was like, it doesn't really make any sense. I've just had like 2 serious injuries and now I'm trying to backflip. But I don't know. It's weird how maybe later in your career you kind of feel like you've maybe missed a little bit because you've been so focused on the racing. At least I did, and I was like, oh, it would be cool to kind of tick this off. Obviously,
Well, you just want to challenge yourself and like what you can get out of it. But I think the older you are, the smarter you are at the whole breakdown. Like I did the
hmm
entire slopestyle world tour of Crankworks like this season with 0 crashes. And I crashed a lot in training, but I never crashed in practice. I never
hmm
crashed in any of my race runs. I never made any mistakes because I wasn't, I guess it's like the maturity of an athlete. I was like, I'm going to get the right resources. I'm going to get those airbags. I'm going to train at this A game and I'm going to compete at
hmm
this C game. And I didn't let the ego get the better of me, even though I'd done front flips. It was like, I'm not going to go and do a front flip again, or I don't need to level up and do a front flip bar spin because it's a world first. Like,
hmm
yeah, I could. And I probably might have when I was younger. But I think there's so much success in itself of being like, getting through an injury and getting through a season injury free
hmm
and being setting an objective and like staying within that. And that was my objective. And like ultimately you've got to be proud of it yourself. And for me, I was like, hell yeah. I learned some new tricks that I thought were moto and I thought were epic. And I love to be like that first girl doing superwomans and super seed indies and you know, that was my run. I was stoked of like going into Crankworks and being like, hell yeah, that's my Rotorua run. And I got on the podium and I'm a part of legacy and I'm part of history. And I stood there with the first 6 girls and dropped in and was like, ultimately I'm proud of that for myself. So yeah, that's all you can really do when you're like setting goals and setting those
hmm
milestones is doing it for yourself and being smart about it and thinking about that longevity as well. when you're taking risks, because yeah, it is a part of the sport.
You definitely think about that a little bit more once you've had a few big injuries.
Yes.
I mean, how much longer do you see yourself competing, and what does life look like also for you after racing?
Ooh. Um, well, Jill Kittner was always 8 years older than me, 8 or
Hmm.
9 years older. She's still throwing down. So I use her
You
as a
got
bit of a
time.
goal and a motivation to be like, you know what, I reckon if I rocked up at Sea Otter in 8 years' time, I'd probably still give it a good crack. So I would say, I always want to continue doing what I love for as long as possible. I think I've been trying to be really conscious of not having that career ender point in my life, like not being like athlete, lose contracts, what do I
Mm,
do now? Mental breakdown. I've wanted this like sliding scale, which is why I've started with different things at businesses,
mhm,
started obviously the broadcast side, started expanding like the skill sets, diving into e-bike, diving into all these other mountain bike categories and getting on the road bike, things with tourism. Like I think that's been that part for me to go, I don't know what the future brings fully, but I know that there's so many opportunities
mhm.
that are already aligning to continue making a career out of it, continue having fun, be healthy, inspired, be inspired. So yeah, definitely on my goals is I would love to eventually be part of the broadcast team for Red Bull
Mhm.
Rampage.
That would
That
be
is
sick.
definitely like a 3 to 5 year plan. Takes a lot of work, but I think, yeah, I could see myself in the finish corral would
So you
be
don't wanna ride Rampage?
absolutely not.
Me neither.
Yeah, love that for them. Just love to talk to them about it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that is.
definitely goals in broadcast, definitely more goals with, the 2025 Crankworx season, like more wins, and they're now bringing in title champs of each category. So
Mhm.
it's been an interesting year. They've pulled speed and style out. So now the whole trick element for me is like not on my 2025 calendar. It's much more like MTB Hard League in the States,
Mhm.
Sea Otter, then Crankworx with pump track, slalom, and air downhill. And then in Australia, we have like a lot of festival events, which is like kind of mini cannonballs. Mini Crankworxes. It's called Cannonball. And
Mhm.
that's like
Yeah.
all round athlete. So yeah, that's a few of my short term plans. And I think from the long term plan, like, yeah, love to have kids, love to have family and that in the future as well. And take my Ignite scholarships more online and really work at the masterclass side of education and helping. I think if I looked at my career from like the perspective and said, like, what is probably the key piece of information that I could like help this next wave of athletes coming through, I think it really is. It's not your team sport athlete. It's not
Mhm.
that. It's really that individual action sport athlete who's like, how do I navigate making a career out of this? Do I start a merch company? Do I start
Mm.
YouTube? Do I do this or do I do all of it? And how? And how do I get a 6-figure contract? And how do I end up getting a manager? And how do I become the face on a TV commercial or a cereal box?
Mhm.
So I really see that as like a gap. And I think when I'm not working like in the business of where I'm at right now and I can work more on it, that's my capacity for the future is going like Ignite online education masterclass and like handing out that roadmap so that, yeah, people can actually go open it up. All right, this
Yeah.
is our email sponsor. Right, this is what $100,000 contract looks like in mountain biking.
Yeah.
What are the what are the breakdowns? What are the deliverables? Everything, like just lay it all out on the table of this. You know, this is how you do it.
I think that's a great concept because I mean, it's hard in a sport like this. I mean, in some, if you got to look at football and rugby and all those type of sports, there's a specific way that you get to where you want to go, and it's sort of pre-written for you.
Mm,
And with a sport like, well, a lot of individual sports, but particularly a sport like mountain biking, it's so hard. Like there's no one way, and there's so many
Right.
different avenues you can do. You first need to decide. I mean, people ask you, I'm sure they ask you as well. How do you become a pro? And how do I get sponsored? And it's sort of like, well, that's a very
Deep.
long question to answer, because
Yeah.
how long is a piece of string? There's so many different ways that you can go about it. And yeah, I think it'll be fantastic to have a place where people can actually figure that out and kind of give them the roadmap.
Yeah. So that's I'd say probably one of my biggest goals for the future is just to lock that in and use my extended relationships and network as well. So it's obviously not just about my journey, but it's about everyone's and all the pieces of brand, industry, everyone coming together.
One of the a question that I ask everyone at the end of the podcast is, what does success mean to you? The word success.
Ooh, I think success is surprising yourself with your own ability
Hmm.
and ultimately being happy and proud and inspiring and being inspired.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Caroline, thank you so much. This has been really awesome. It's been really cool to find out more about you and your career, and hopefully, I'm sure that you will inspire definitely many up and coming mountain bikers and BMXers that are watching this. So yeah, thanks so much for coming on.
Love it. Thanks so much for having me.
If you guys enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe. And to see more episodes, click the link right up here.
That was iconic.